Part 1. The discovery, the year was 1867, and life on the Texas frontier was harder than most people could imagine. Little Lily Whitfield was only 10 years old, but she'd already learned what it meant to survive in a place where neighbors were miles apart and danger could come from anywhere. Her family's small wooden house sat alone on the prairie, surrounded by nothing but tall grass, wildflowers, and the occasional tree line that marked where the creek ran through their land. Lily wasn't like most girls her age. While other children might have been scared of the wilderness, she found peace in it. Her mother often worried about her wandering off, but her father said it was good for a child to know the land. After all, this was their home now, whether they liked it or not. On that particular autumn afternoon, the sky was the kind of blue that made everything seem peaceful. The air had just started to turn cool, and the leaves were beginning to change colors. Lily had told her mother she was going to collect wildflowers near the creek, something she did almost every day. Her mother had agreed, but reminded her to stay close and be back before sunset. Lily walked through the tall grass with her small wicker basket, humming a tune her grandmother used to sing back in Virginia. She missed her grandmother terribly. Life had been so much easier back east, but her father said opportunity was out here in the west. So far, all Lily had seen was hard work and loneliness. As she bent down to pick a cluster of purple flowers, she heard a sound that didn't belong. It was something between a groan and a whimper, barely audible over the rustling grass. Lily froze, her heart suddenly beating faster. Her father had taught her to be cautious. Out here, strange sounds could mean anything from a wounded animal to something far more dangerous. But curiosity got the better of her. Slowly, carefully, she moved toward the sound. It was coming from a thick patch of brush near the creek bank, a place she usually avoided because the thorns were so sharp. As she pushed aside some branches, she saw him. A boy, maybe 15 or 16 years old, was lying on his side in the dirt. His skin was darker than hers, and his long black hair was matted with sweat and dirt. He wore clothes made of animal hide, and even in her young mind, Lily knew exactly what that meant. He was Comanche, one of the native people her father had warned her about countless times. Her first instinct was to run. Every story she'd ever heard about the Comanche people painted them as fierce warriors who showed no mercy to settlers. Her father's voice echoed in her head, warning her to never ever approach them. But then she saw his leg, and all those warnings seemed to fade away. The boy's left leg was caught in what looked like a cruel metal trap, the kind hunters sometimes used for wolves or bears. The trap's teeth had bitten deep into his flesh, and blood had soaked through the leather of his clothing. His face was twisted in pain, and his breathing was shallow and rapid. Lily stood there for a moment, frozen between fear and something else, something she couldn't quite name. This wasn't a dangerous warrior. This was just a boy, hurt and alone, probably as scared as she was. The boy's eyes fluttered open, and for a brief second they locked onto hers. She could see the surprise in them, mixed with fear and pain. He tried to move, to push himself away from her, but the movement made him cry out in agony. Then his eyes rolled back and he went still again, though she could see his chest still rising and falling. Lily made a decision in that moment that would change everything. She turned and ran, but not away from him. She ran toward home, her basket of flowers forgotten in the grass. She burst through the door of their small house, startling her mother, who was preparing vegetables for dinner. "Mama, I need water and some cloth." "Please, quickly." Her mother looked at her with concern. "Child, what's wrong? Are you hurt?" "No, Mama, but I need them for my project. I'm making something down by the creek, please." Her mother, perhaps sensing something in her daughter's urgency but too busy to question further, pointed to the cloth scraps in her sewing basket. "Take what you need, but don't be long. Your father will be back from checking the fence line soon." Lily grabbed the cloth pieces and filled a small canteen with water from their bucket. She also took a piece of bread from the kitchen table, wrapping it in one of the cloths. Then she ran back to the creek as fast as her legs could carry her. The boy was exactly where she'd left him, still unconscious. Lily knelt beside him, her hand shaking as she uncorked the canteen. She'd seen her mother tend to cuts and injuries before, though never anything this serious. First, she carefully poured some water over the wound around the trap. The boy stirred slightly but didn't wake. The trap itself was too heavy for her to remove, and she was afraid of hurting him more if she tried. Instead, she took the cloth and began cleaning the dried blood from around the injury as gently as she could. The boy's eyes opened again, and this time they stayed open. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. Was it confusion, gratitude, fear? Probably all three. He said something in a language she didn't understand, his voice weak and raspy. "I'm sorry," Lily whispered, not sure if he could understand her any better than she could understand him. "I can't get the trap off, but I can clean it. I brought water." She lifted the canteen to his lips, and after a moment's hesitation he drank. The water seemed to revive him slightly, and he watched her as she continued to tend to his wound. When she was done cleaning it as best she could, she tore the cloth into strips and wrapped them carefully around his leg, over and above the trap. The sun was getting lower in the sky, and Lily knew she had to go home before her parents started worrying. She placed the bread beside the boy and made sure the canteen was within his reach. Then she did something that surprised even herself. She touched his shoulder gently and smiled, trying to show him that she meant no harm. The boy looked at her for a long moment, and something passed between them, an understanding that needed no words. Then his eyes closed again, whether from exhaustion or pain she couldn't tell. Lily stood up and looked down at him one more time before turning to head home. As she walked back through the darkening grass, her mind was racing. What had she just done? If her father found out, he would be furious. If anyone in town heard about it, they might think she was crazy or worse. But as she reached her house and saw the warm light glowing from the windows, she felt something she hadn't expected. She felt right about what she'd done. That boy was somebody's son, maybe somebody's brother. He was hurt and alone, and she'd helped him. That's what her grandmother had always taught her to do. Help those who need it, no matter who they are. That night at dinner, her father talked about seeing signs of Comanche in the area and warned them all to be extra careful. Lily kept her eyes on her plate and said nothing. As she lay in bed that night, she wondered if the boy was still alive, if he was warm enough, if anyone was looking for him. She decided that tomorrow she would go back to the creek. She would bring more food and water. She would help him until he was strong enough to leave. It was the right thing to do, even if it was also the dangerous thing to do. Outside her window, the stars shone bright over the Texas prairie, and somewhere out there in the darkness a wounded boy lay holding on to life, not knowing that the little girl who'd saved him would soon change both their destinies forever. Part 2. The Secret Care. The next morning came too slowly for Lily. She'd barely slept, her mind filled with worry about the boy by the creek. Was he still alive? Had wild animals found him during the night? Had the infection from that terrible trap already set in? These questions spun through her head as she helped her mother with breakfast. Her father was in an unusually talkative mood that morning, which made everything harder. He spoke about his plans to reinforce the chicken coop and mentioned again how he'd seen unshod horse tracks near their property line. "Comanche ponies," he said firmly, spreading butter on his bread. "They're getting bolder, coming this close to homesteads. We need to stay sharp." Lily's mother nodded nervously, glancing at her daughter. "Maybe Lily shouldn't wander so far from the house for a while." "No, Mama, please," Lily said, perhaps too quickly. Both her parents looked at her with surprise. "I mean, I feel safe. I'm always careful, and I never go too far. Please don't make me stay inside all day." Her father studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but you stay within shouting distance, you hear? And if you see anything at all that seems wrong, you run straight home." "Yes, Papa, I promise." As soon as she could slip away, Lily filled her pockets with biscuits and dried meat from the kitchen. She wrapped an apple in cloth and filled the canteen again. Her mother was hanging laundry and didn't notice when she also grabbed the small bottle of whiskey her father kept for medicinal purposes. She'd seen her mother pour it on wounds to keep them from going bad. The walk to the creek felt longer than usual. With each step, Lily prepared herself for the worst. What if he was gone? What if he was dead? But when she pushed through the brush to their spot, she found him awake and sitting up, his back against a tree. He tensed when he saw her, his hand moving toward a knife at his belt. But then recognition crossed his face and he relaxed slightly. He looked terrible. His face was drawn and pale despite his dark skin, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air. The trap was still clamped around his leg, and Lily could see that the wound had worsened overnight. "I brought food," she said softly, kneeling a safe distance away. She laid out the biscuits and meat, then rolled the apple toward him. He picked it up slowly, never taking his eyes off her, and bit into it. The way he ate told her he was starving. While he ate, Lily examined the trap more carefully. It was heavy iron, old and rusty, probably left by hunters years ago. The mechanism had a release lever, but it was stiff with age and dirt. "I'm going to try something," she said, knowing he couldn't understand her words but hoping her tone would convey her intention. It might hurt. She positioned herself carefully and pressed down on the lever with all her weight. The boy understood what she was trying to do and braced himself. The trap's springs were strong and at first nothing happened. Lily pushed harder, her face red with effort. Suddenly, with a rusty screech, the jaws opened just enough. The boy quickly pulled his leg free, gasping in pain. The trap snapped shut again with a terrible clang. Now that his leg was free, Lily could see the full extent of the damage. The trap had torn through skin and muscle, leaving deep puncture wounds on both sides of his lower leg. It was a miracle he could even move it at all. Without hesitation, Lily uncorked the whiskey bottle. She looked at him, trying to communicate what she was about to do. She poured a little on her own hand first and made a face at the sting, then pointed to his leg. His eyes widened with understanding, and he nodded, gripping the tree trunk behind him. When the whiskey hit the open wounds, the boy's whole body went rigid. He bit down on his own hand to keep from crying out, his knuckles white with tension. Lily worked as quickly as she could, cleaning the wound thoroughly despite how much pain she knew she was causing him. When she was done, she wrapped his leg with fresh cloth strips, tying them firmly but not too tight. They sat in silence for a while after that, both exhausted. The boy's breathing slowly returned to normal, and he looked at her with an expression that was clearly gratitude. He said something in his language, and though she didn't understand the words, she understood the meaning. "You're welcome," she replied simply. Over the next hour, something remarkable happened. Using gestures, drawings in the dirt, and simple sounds, they began to communicate. He pointed to himself and said something that sounded like "running wolf." She repeated it back to him, and he nodded, then pointed at her with a questioning look. "Lily," she said, touching her chest. "Lily. Lily," he repeated, the sound slightly different in his accent but close enough. For the first time since she'd found him, he smiled. Running Wolf, as she now thought of him, showed her through elaborate hand gestures what had happened to him. His hunting party had been tracking deer when they'd encountered a group of settlers. There had been shouting, some shooting, and in the confusion he'd been separated from the others. He'd run for miles before stepping into the trap in the dark. Lily told him about her family, about the long journey from Virginia, about how lonely she sometimes felt out here. He probably didn't understand most of her words, but he listened intently, seeming to understand her feelings, if not her language. Before she left that day, Running Wolf reached into a small pouch at his waist and pulled out a handful of crushed leaves. He pointed to his leg, then to the leaves, then made a gesture that suggested mixing them with water. Lily understood. This was medicine, his people's way of healing wounds. She took the leaves carefully and nodded. That evening she would sneak back with more water and help him apply the medicine. As she stood to leave, Running Wolf caught her hand. He looked at her seriously and said several words she didn't understand, but his tone was solemn, like he was making a promise. The next 3 days fell into a pattern. Lily would do her morning chores, then slip away to the creek with whatever food she could manage. Each time she found Running Wolf a little stronger. The medicine he'd given her was working. The swelling in his leg was going down and the wounds were starting to close. He began teaching her things during these visits. He showed her how to identify animal tracks in the soft creek mud, the difference between deer, rabbit, and coyote. He demonstrated how to move through the grass without making noise, how to read the sky for weather changes. And slowly, word by word, they began to teach each other their languages. "Water," she'd say, pointing to the creek. "Bia," he'd reply in Comanche, and she'd repeat it back. "Tree," she'd say. "Tukup," he'd respond. By the 4th day, Running Wolf was able to stand with support. Lily helped him move to a small cave she knew about, hidden behind a curtain of vines and barely visible from the creek. It was a place she'd discovered months ago and kept as her secret hideaway. Now it would be Running Wolf's shelter. The cave was small but dry, and it offered much better protection than the open brush where she'd found him. She brought him her father's old coat, a wool blanket she'd sneaked from the storage chest, and even an old tin cup for drinking. Running Wolf accepted each gift with obvious gratitude. his respect for this strange little white girl growing daily. But Lily was starting to worry about other things. Her mother had noticed she wasn't eating as much at meals since she was giving so much of her food to Running Wolf. "Are you feeling ill, sweetheart?" her mother had asked, feeling her forehead. "No, Mama, I'm fine. Just not very hungry lately." Her father had also become more suspicious. "You spend an awful lot of time at that creek," he said one evening. "What exactly are you doing down there all day?" "Just exploring, Papa. Looking at birds and plants. It's interesting." He'd given her a long look but said nothing more. Lily knew she was running out of time. Soon her parents would either follow her or forbid her from leaving the house at all, and Running Wolf was growing anxious too. Through their limited communication, she understood that he needed to find his people before winter truly set in. On the 8th day, when she arrived at the cave, Running Wolf was standing on his own. He still limped badly, but he could walk. He looked at her with sadness in his eyes and drew a picture in the dirt of the sun setting and rising again. Tomorrow. He would leave tomorrow. Lily felt a lump form in her throat. She'd known this day would come, but she wasn't ready for it. In just over a week, this boy had become her friend. Maybe her only real friend in this lonely place. He'd shown her a different way of seeing the world, taught her skills her father never would, and proved that the scary stories people told weren't always true. That night, she barely touched her dinner. Her mother and father exchanged worried glances but didn't press her. After they'd gone to bed, Lily lay awake in her small room watching the moon shadows on her wall. Tomorrow, Running Wolf would leave and she'd probably never see him again. She made a decision. In the morning, she would bring him extra food for his journey, and she would give him the most precious thing she owned, the silver compass her grandfather had given her before he died. Running Wolf would need it more than she would to find his way home. As she finally drifted off to sleep, she had no idea that this goodbye would not be the end of their story. She couldn't know that helping this boy would set in motion events that would save her entire family's lives. All she knew was that she'd done the right thing. Part 3. The Bond morning came with a heavy heart for Lily. She dressed slowly, knowing this would be the last time she'd make the journey to the cave to see her friend. Her mother noticed her sad face over breakfast but assumed she was just tired from all her outdoor adventures. "Maybe you should rest today," her mother suggested gently. "You've been spending so much time outside lately." "No, Mama, I need to go out today. Just one more time. Please." Something in her daughter's voice made her mother pause, but she nodded. "All right, sweetheart. But be back by noon. Your father wants to go into town this afternoon and you'll need to come with us." Lily packed more food than usual, wrapping everything carefully in cloth. She added the compass, polishing it one last time with her sleeve before tucking it into her pocket. She also brought a small knife her father used for whittling. It wasn't much, but Running Wolf would need something to defend himself or hunt with on his journey. When she reached the cave, she found Running Wolf already outside, testing his weight on his injured leg. He'd clearly been practicing walking, and though he still limped, he was moving much better than before. When he saw her, his face lit up with a smile that made him look younger than his years. "Lily," he said warmly, and she smiled back despite the sadness in her chest. They sat together on a flat rock near the cave entrance, and Lily unpacked all the food she'd brought. Running Wolf's eyes widened at the amount. There was bread, dried meat, cheese, and even some of her mother's preserves. It was enough to last him several days if he was careful. While they ate together for the last time, Running Wolf reached into his clothing and pulled out something he'd been working on. It was a small carving, no bigger than Lily's palm, made from a piece of soft wood. He must have been working on it for days with just a sharp stone. It was a bird, delicate and beautiful, with its wings spread as if in flight. The detail was incredible. You could see individual feathers, the curve of the beak, even tiny talons tucked underneath. Lily took it with trembling hands, her eyes filling with tears. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Running Wolf didn't understand her exact words, but he understood her emotion. He pointed to the bird, then to her, then up at the sky. Lily understood the message. Even though they'd be far apart, they'd both be under the same sky. The thought comforted her more than she expected. She pulled out the compass and placed it in his hands. His eyes went wide. He'd never seen anything like it before. Lily opened it and showed him how the needle always pointed north. She drew in the dirt, showing him that if he kept the needle pointing to his left and walked forward, he'd head west, which was where she believed his people must be. Running Wolf held the compass like it was made of glass, understanding instantly how valuable it was. He looked from the compass to Lily, then back again, clearly conflicted. He tried to give it back, knowing it must mean something to her, but Lily closed his fingers around it and shook her head firmly. "You need it more than I do," she said. She made walking gestures, then pointed west. "Go home. Find your family." For the next few hours, they didn't think about goodbye. Instead, Running Wolf continued the lessons he'd been teaching her. He showed her how to find water by watching where birds flew in the evening. He taught her which berries were safe to eat and which would make her sick. He demonstrated how to tell direction by the sun and stars, knowledge that could save her life someday. In return, Lily taught him more English words. "Friend," she said, pointing to herself and then to him. "Friend," he repeated carefully, and then taught her the Comanche word. "Tekwapu." "Tekwapu," she said, and they both smiled. Running Wolf then showed her something special. He took her hand and led her to a spot near the cave where the mud was soft. He knelt down and made several handprints, pressing his palms firmly into the earth. Then he gestured for her to do the same. Lily knelt beside him and pressed her small hands into the mud next to his larger ones. They sat back and looked at the prints together. Two different people from two different worlds leaving their marks side by side. It was a promise, Lily thought, a memory made physical. Long after they were both gone from this place, these prints would remain for a while, proof that their friendship had been real. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, they both knew the time had come. Running Wolf stood, testing his leg one more time. He picked up the bundle of food Lily had brought and secured it to his belt. He tucked the compass carefully into his clothing, close to his heart. The knife she'd given him went into his other side. Then he turned to her and his face grew serious. He placed his hand over his heart and spoke in Comanche, a long string of words that flowed like water. Lily didn't understand them, but she felt their weight. This was important, a vow or a promise of some kind. When he finished, he took her hand and pressed it to his heart, then took his own hand and pressed it to hers. The gesture was simple but powerful. Lily felt tears streaming down her face and she didn't bother to wipe them away. "Tekwapu," she said softly. "Friend?" "Friend," he replied in English, the words sounding strange in his mouth but filled with emotion. Running Wolf reached up and touched her face gently, wiping away one of her tears. Then he smiled, a sad but genuine smile, and began to walk away. He moved slowly because of his leg, heading toward the western tree line. Lily watched him go, her vision blurred by tears. Every few steps, Running Wolf would turn back and look at her, and she would wave. Finally, he reached the edge of the woods. He turned one last time, raised his hand high in farewell, and then disappeared into the shadows between the trees. Lily stood there long after he was gone, staring at the spot where she had last seen him. The prairie felt emptier now, lonelier than it had ever been before. She walked back to the cave and looked at their handprints in the mud, already drying in the sun. She picked up the wooden bird from where she'd carefully set it on a rock. As she held it in her palm, she made her own silent promise. She would never forget Running Wolf. She would remember that people who seemed different weren't always enemies. She would remember that kindness mattered more than fear, that courage sometimes looked like a little girl with bandages and water, and that true friendship could bloom anywhere, even in the most unlikely circumstances. The walk home felt different. Lily felt older somehow, changed by the experience. She'd kept a secret from her parents for over a week, nursed a stranger back to health, and made a friend across a divide that most people said couldn't be crossed. She'd proven to herself that she was braver than she'd thought. When she arrived home, her mother was waiting on the porch. "There you are. We need to get ready for town. Did you have a good morning?" "Yes, Mama," Lily said, clutching the wooden bird in her pocket. "I said goodbye to a friend." Her mother looked puzzled. "Goodbye? I didn't know you'd met any other children out here. Just someone I met by the creek, but they had to go home." "Well, maybe you'll see them again someday," her mother said absently, ushering her inside to wash up. "Maybe," Lily said softly, though she doubted it. The frontier was too big, too wild, and their two worlds too far apart. That afternoon, as their wagon rolled toward town, Lily sat in the back and looked out over the prairie. She wondered where Running Wolf was now, if his leg was holding up, if he was using the compass to find his way. She hoped his people would find him soon, that he'd make it home safely. She had no way of knowing that Running Wolf was thinking of her too, determined to tell his people about the brave little white girl who had saved his life. She couldn't know that he was already planning how to repay the debt of honor he felt he owed. And she certainly couldn't imagine that in just a few short hours, her act of kindness would begin to bear fruit in a way that would shake her family to their very core. As the wagon creaked along the rutted road, Lily fell asleep with her hand in her pocket, fingers wrapped around the wooden bird. In her dreams, she saw Running Wolf reaching his village, saw him embraced by his family, saw him showing them the compass and telling them his story. She didn't dream about what would happen next. Reality, it turned out, would be far more incredible than anything her imagination could create. The sun was setting over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Somewhere out there, a young Comanche warrior was making his way home, carrying with him a silver compass and a story of unexpected kindness. And in just a few hours, when morning came again, everything would change. The bond between Lily and Running Wolf had been forged in secret, built on trust and compassion. But soon that private bond would become public in the most dramatic way possible. The test of their friendship was about to begin, and neither of them was prepared for what was coming. But that's the thing about true friendship. It doesn't need preparation. It doesn't need permission. It simply exists, strong and real, ready to prove itself when the moment comes. Part 4. The farewell and the night. The trip to town had been uneventful but long. By the time the Whitfield family returned home, the sun was already dipping below the horizon, painting the prairie in shades of purple and gold. Lily's father unhitched the horses while her mother started preparing a late supper. Lily helped carry in the supplies they'd bought, mostly flour, sugar, and some fabric her mother wanted for new curtains. Dinner that evening was quieter than usual. Lily's father seemed preoccupied, his mind clearly somewhere else. Finally, as her mother was clearing the plates, he spoke up. "I heard troubling news in town today," he said, his voice serious. Several homesteads to the west reported seeing large groups of Comanche moving through the area. Some families are talking about heading back east, at least until spring. Lily's mother's hand went to her throat. "Do you think we should go too?" "No," her father said firmly. "We've put too much work into this place to abandon it now. But we need to be smart. Keep the rifle loaded and by the door. Don't let Lily wander off alone anymore." Lily's heart sank, but she nodded. She wanted to tell them that not all Comanche were dangerous, that she'd met one who was kind and grateful. But she knew they'd never understand. They'd be furious that she'd put herself in danger, and worse, they might try to find Running Wolf to hurt him. "Yes, Papa," she said quietly, pushing food around on her plate. That night, Lily lay in her small bed, unable to sleep. Her mind kept drifting back to Running Wolf. Had he made it far enough away? Was he safe? The thought of him out there alone, still recovering from his injury, made her chest ache with worry. She clutched the wooden bird he'd carved for her, running her fingers over its smooth surface. In the darkness of her room, she whispered a prayer for his safety, something her grandmother had taught her to do for people she cared about. She prayed that he'd find his people, that his leg would heal completely, and that he'd remember her as kindly as she remembered him. Outside her window, the night was alive with sounds. Crickets chirped their evening songs, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled at the rising moon. It was the same symphony she heard every night, familiar and somehow comforting despite its wildness. Lily finally drifted off to sleep, her dreams filled with images of the prairie, the creek, and a young warrior walking toward home under a canopy of stars. In her dream, Running Wolf turned back one last time and waved. And she waved back, knowing somehow that everything would be all right. While the Whitfield family slept peacefully, unaware of what was coming, something remarkable was happening miles away in the darkness. Running Wolf had indeed made it home, though the journey had taken everything he had. His injured leg had nearly given out twice, but the compass Lily had given him had kept him on course. When he finally stumbled into his village just after sunset, weak from exhaustion and pain, his family had rushed to him with joy and relief. His mother had wept, holding her son and thanking the spirits for his safe return. His father, a respected warrior, had embraced him fiercely. But it was his uncle, Chief Red Sky, who listened most carefully when Running Wolf told his story. The young warrior sat by the fire in his uncle's lodge, his injured leg freshly bandaged with proper medicine by the tribe's healer, and spoke of the little white girl who had saved his life. He told them everything. How she'd found him dying in the trap, how she'd brought him food and water for over a week, how she'd cleaned his wounds despite the obvious danger to herself, how she'd given him her most precious possessions to help him get home. The other warriors in the lodge listened with growing amazement. This was unheard of. Settler child helping a Comanche warrior, asking nothing in return, keeping him hidden from her own people at great personal risk. Running Wolf showed them the compass, explaining how the strange metal device had guided him home. He showed them the knife, the remains of the food wrapped in white cloth. He spoke of her kindness, her bravery, and the bond they'd formed despite having no common language. Chief Red Sky, an older man with wise eyes and hair streaked with silver, studied his nephew carefully. "You are certain of this? She did not do this hoping for reward or trade. She's a child, Uncle. She did it because it was right. Because she saw me suffering and could not walk away." Running Wolf's voice was firm. "I made a promise to her, placed my hand over my heart and swore that I would honor this debt. But I cannot honor it alone. This requires more than one man." The chief was silent for a long time, staring into the fire. The other warriors waited, knowing he was considering something important. Finally, he looked up at his nephew. "You are right. This is not just your debt, it is ours as well. If what you say is true, this child has shown honor that many warriors twice her age could not match. Such courage must be recognized." He paused, then made his decision. "At dawn we ride." Running Wolf's eyes widened. "Uncle, you don't mean—" "I mean exactly what you think. We will go to this homestead. We will see this child for ourselves. And we will honor the debt our people owe her." The chief's face was stern but not unkind. "You said she lives alone with her parents on the eastern grasslands? Near the creek?" "Yes, Uncle, I can take you there. Then rest tonight. In the morning we gather the warriors, all of them." As word spread through the village, excitement and curiosity grew. By the time the moon reached its peak in the sky, plans were already being made. This was unprecedented and everyone wanted to be part of it. A child from the people who had driven them from their lands, who had killed their brothers and taken their territories, had shown pure kindness to one of their own. This could not go unanswered. While the Comanche village buzzed with activity and preparation, Lily slept on, unaware that her simple act of compassion had set in motion something much larger than she could have imagined. Her father snored softly in the next room. Her mother slept peacefully. None of them heard the distant sounds of horses being prepared, of warriors painting their faces by firelight, of a chief making ready to lead his people on a mission of honor. The night deepened and the stars wheeled slowly overhead. On the prairie, a cool wind blew from the west, carrying with it the scent of sage and possibility. Small animals scurried through the grass and night birds called to each other across the darkness. In her room, Lily stirred in her sleep, the wooden bird still clutched in her hand. She was dreaming of flying, of soaring high above the prairie like the bird Running Wolf had carved for her. In her dream, she could see everything: the creek where they'd met, the cave where he'd hidden, the path he'd taken into the west. She flew higher and higher until the whole world seemed small beneath her. And then in her dream she saw something that made no sense. She saw horses, dozens of them, moving through the darkness toward her home. She saw warriors with painted faces and weapons at their sides. She saw them forming a circle surrounding her small house like a living fence. Lily woke with a start, her heart pounding. The room was still dark, though she could see the first hint of gray light creeping through her window. It was that quiet time just before dawn, when the night creatures have gone to sleep but the day animals haven't yet woken. She lay there, trying to shake off the strange dream. It had felt so real, so vivid, but it was just a dream, brought on by her worry for Running Wolf and her father's talk of Comanche in the area. She closed her eyes, trying to fall back asleep. Outside, beyond her window, beyond her sight, the eastern sky was slowly beginning to lighten, and moving across that lightening sky, coming from the west like shadows given form, was a sight that would have stopped her heart if she could have seen it. 40 horses, maybe more, moving in silence across the prairie. 40 warriors, painted and proud, following their chief toward a small homestead where a little girl slept, still holding a wooden bird in her hand. They moved like ghosts, these warriors, making no sound except the soft whisper of grass beneath their horses' hooves. They spread out as they came, forming a wide circle around the Whitfield house just as Lily had seen in her dream. By the time the sun's first rays touched the horizon, they were in position. Every warrior sat perfectly still on his horse waiting. Chief Red Sky raised his hand, signaling that no one should move or make a sound. They would wait for the family to wake naturally. They would not attack or threaten. They had come for honor, not war. Inside the house, Lily's father was the first to wake. He always rose early to start the day's work. He stretched, yawned, and shuffled toward the window to check the weather. His hand was reaching for the shutter when something made him pause. There was a quality to the light outside, something different, something wrong. He pulled the shutter open and looked out. For a moment, his mind couldn't process what his eyes were seeing. Then, all at once, the reality hit him like a physical blow. Warriors, dozens of them, surrounding his house, sitting motionless on their horses in the pale dawn light. The rifle. He needed the rifle. His hand trembled as he reached for it, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. This was it. This was what every settler feared most. They were surrounded, outnumbered, with no hope of escape or defense. He checked the load on the rifle with shaking hands, then moved to wake his wife. "Don't scream," he whispered urgently. "Don't make a sound." But... Part 5. The surrounding time seemed to slow down inside the Whitfield house. Minutes felt like hours as the family stood frozen at the window, staring out at the ring of warriors surrounding their home. The morning sun continued to rise, casting long shadows across the prairie and illuminating the scene with terrible clarity. Lily's father gripped the rifle so tightly his knuckles had turned white. His military training from years ago told him this was hopeless. One rifle, maybe 10 bullets if he was lucky against 40 skilled warriors. They could rush the house in seconds if they wanted to. The thin wooden walls would offer almost no protection. "Why aren't they doing anything?" Lily's mother whispered, her voice trembling. "Why are they just sitting there?" "I don't know," her father replied quietly, never taking his eyes off the warriors. "Maybe they're waiting for us to come out. Or maybe they're deciding what to do with us." Lily stood between her parents, her heart hammering in her chest. But unlike her parents, her fear was mixed with confusion. She searched the faces of the warriors, looking for Running Wolf, but there were too many of them and they were too far away for her to make out individual features clearly. Could this be because of him? Had she brought this on her family by helping him? The thought made her stomach twist with guilt and fear. But another part of her, the part that had gotten to know Running Wolf, couldn't believe he would do this. He'd been grateful, kind. He'd called her friend. The standoff continued. The warriors remained perfectly still, like statues carved from stone. Their horses occasionally shifted weight or flicked their tails at flies, but the men themselves might as well have been part of the landscape. It was eerie, unsettling, and somehow more frightening than if they'd been whooping and charging. "Maybe they want to trade," Lily's mother suggested desperately, grasping at any explanation that didn't end in violence. "We could offer them food or tools or—" "They don't want our supplies," her father interrupted, his voice grim. "If they wanted those, they'd just take them. They're waiting for something else." Another hour passed. The sun climbed higher and the day grew warmer. Inside the house, the family didn't dare move away from the window. They'd pulled Lily back slightly, keeping her between them and away from direct view, though they all knew there was nowhere to hide if this turned violent. Lily's mind raced. She thought about Running Wolf, about the days they'd spent together, about the promise he'd made that she hadn't understood. She thought about the wooden bird in her room, about his hand pressed to his heart, about the way he'd looked at her before disappearing into the trees. "Papa," she said suddenly, her voice small, "maybe they don't want to hurt us." Her father looked down at her, his face drawn with stress. "Sweetheart, I know you're scared, but we have to be realistic about—" "No, listen," Lily insisted, finding courage she didn't know she had. "If they wanted to hurt us, they would have done it already. They could have attacked while we were sleeping. They could have burned the house. But they're just waiting." Her mother pulled her close. "Oh, honey, you don't understand. These are dangerous people. I know what people say about them," Lily interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. "But what if people are wrong? What if they came here for a different reason?" Her father shook his head. What other reason could there be? We've never had any contact with them. We haven't done anything to—" He stopped suddenly, his eyes narrowing as he studied the warriors more carefully. "Wait, that one in the front. He's older, wearing more decorations. That must be their chief." He was right. Chief Red Sky sat on a magnificent painted horse at what seemed to be the head of the formation. He was clearly in charge, and he appeared to be the one keeping the others in check. Every so often, a younger warrior would glance at him, as if asking for permission to act, and the chief would make a small gesture that meant, "Wait. Why would a chief come here?" Lily's mother wondered aloud. "For just one family? It doesn't make sense." "Nothing about this makes sense," her father muttered. He wiped sweat from his forehead with his free hand, the other still clutching the rifle. "I feel like we're missing something important." They were missing something important, but none of them could figure out what it was. The key to understanding this situation was locked in Lily's secret, and she was terrified to speak it aloud. What if she told them about Running Wolf and they got angry? What if they blamed her for bringing this danger to their door? What if they did something that provoked the warriors outside? So she stayed silent, wrestling with her conscience while the standoff continued. Around mid-morning, something changed. One of the younger warriors shifted on his horse, and Lily caught a glimpse of his face more clearly. Her heart skipped a beat. Even at this distance, she recognized the way he held himself, the set of his shoulders. It was Running Wolf. He'd made it home safely, and somehow, impossibly, he was here. But why? What did this mean? Running Wolf seemed to sense her watching because he turned his head slightly, scanning the house. Lily instinctively took a small step forward, and for just a second, their eyes met across the distance. She saw recognition in his face and something else. Was that a smile? It was brief, almost invisible, but it had been there. Lily's father noticed her movement. "Get back!" he commanded sharply, pulling her away from the window. "Don't let them see you clearly." "Papa, I don't think they want to hurt us," Lily said again, more urgently this time. The pieces were starting to come together in her mind, though the full picture was still unclear. "You can't know that," her father said. But there was less certainty in his voice now. The strange nature of this confrontation was wearing on him. Warriors didn't surround a house and then just sit there. They attacked or they demanded something. This patient waiting was outside his experience, and it was making him doubt everything he thought he knew. Lily's mother had moved to check their supplies, mentally calculating how long they could hold out if this became a siege. They had water from the well, but that was outside. They had maybe 3 days of food in the house. The situation was becoming clearer. They couldn't stay inside forever, but stepping outside felt like walking into a trap. "Maybe we should try to talk to them," Lily suggested. "Someone could go outside and—" "Absolutely not," both her parents said in unison. "But Papa—" "No, Lily, we stay inside until we understand what's happening. Or until they make their intentions clear." As if in response to this statement, there was movement in the circle of warriors. Chief Red Sky raised his hand, and immediately all the warriors sat up straighter, more alert. The chief said something in his language, his voice carrying clearly across the open ground, though the words meant nothing to the Whitfield family. Several warriors dismounted, but they didn't approach the house. Instead, they sat down on the ground, cross-legged, still maintaining their circle. The message was clear. They weren't leaving, but they also weren't attacking. They were settling in, prepared to wait as long as necessary. "What are they doing?" Lily's mother asked, bewildered. I think they're making camp," her father replied, equally confused. "They're planning to stay." This development changed everything. This wasn't a raid. Raids were quick, violent, over in minutes. This was something else entirely, something patient and purposeful. But what? The sun reached its peak and the day grew hot. The warriors outside showed no signs of discomfort despite sitting in the direct sunlight. Inside the house, the family was sweating, cramped and growing increasingly desperate for answers. Finally, Lily couldn't take it anymore. The guilt of her secret was crushing her, and the fear that her silence might lead to violence was too much to bear. She had to tell them. Whatever the consequences, her parents needed to know the truth. "Mama, Papa," she said, her voice shaking. "I need to tell you something. Something important." Her parents looked at her, and something in her tone made them really listen. Her father lowered the rifle slightly, giving her his full attention. "What is it, sweetheart?" her mother asked gently. Lily took a deep breath, her hands trembling. "A little over a week ago, I found someone hurt by the creek." A boy. He was caught in a trap and his leg was badly injured. I helped him. I brought him food and water and medicine and... She trailed off, seeing the growing horror on her parents' faces. What kind of boy? Her father asked, though from his tone he already knew the answer. A Comanche boy, Lily whispered. His name is Running Wolf. He was lost from his hunting party and I couldn't just leave him there to die. I'm sorry, I know you told me to stay away from them, but he was hurt and scared and I... Tears were streaming down her face now. I think he's out there. I think that's why they're here. The silence that followed was deafening. Lily's parents stared at her, their minds struggling to process this information. Their little girl had been secretly caring for a Comanche warrior for over a week, right under their noses. And now his entire tribe had shown up at their door? But before either parent could respond, before they could express their shock or anger or fear, something happened outside that changed everything. Chief Red Sky stood up from where he'd been sitting on his horse. He dismounted slowly, deliberately, and began walking toward the house. He was alone and his hands were clearly visible at his sides, carrying no weapons. Part 5. The surrounding time seemed to slow down inside the Whitfield house. Minutes felt like hours as the family stood frozen at the window, staring out at the ring of warriors surrounding their home. The morning sun continued to rise, casting long shadows across the prairie and illuminating the scene with terrible clarity. Lily's father gripped the rifle so tightly his knuckles had turned white. His military training from years ago told him this was hopeless. One rifle, maybe 10 bullets if he was lucky against 40 skilled warriors. They could rush the house in seconds if they wanted to. The thin wooden walls would offer almost no protection. Why aren't they doing anything? Lily's mother whispered, her voice trembling. Why are they just sitting there? I don't know, her father replied quietly, never taking his eyes off the warriors. Maybe they're waiting for us to come out. Or maybe they're deciding what to do with us. Lily stood between her parents, her heart hammering in her chest. But unlike her parents, her fear was mixed with confusion. She searched the faces of the warriors, looking for Running Wolf, but there were too many of them and they were too far away for her to make out individual features clearly. Could this be because of him? Had she brought this on her family by helping him? The thought made her stomach twist with guilt and fear. But another part of her, the part that had gotten to know Running Wolf, couldn't believe he would do this. He'd been grateful, kind. He'd called her friend. The standoff continued. The warriors remained perfectly still, like statues carved from stone. Their horses occasionally shifted weight or flicked their tails at flies, but the men themselves might as well have been part of the landscape. It was eerie, unsettling, and somehow more frightening than if they'd been whooping and charging. Maybe they want to trade, Lily's mother suggested desperately, grasping at any explanation that didn't end in violence. We could offer them food or tools, or... They don't want our supplies, her father interrupted, his voice grim. If they wanted those, they'd just take them. They're waiting for something else. Another hour passed. The sun climbed higher and the day grew warmer. Inside the house, the family didn't dare move away from the window. They'd pulled Lily back slightly, keeping her between them and away from direct view, though they all knew there was nowhere to hide if this turned violent. Lily's mind raced. She thought about Running Wolf, about the days they'd spent together, about the promise he'd made that she hadn't understood. She thought about the wooden bird in her room, about his hand pressed to his heart, about the way he'd looked at her before disappearing into the trees. Papa, she said suddenly, her voice small, maybe they don't want to hurt us. Her father looked down at her, his face drawn with stress. Sweetheart, I know you're scared, but we have to be realistic about... No, listen, Lily insisted, finding courage she didn't know she had. If they wanted to hurt us, they would have done it already. They could have attacked while we were sleeping. They could have burned the house. But they're just waiting. Her mother pulled her close. Oh, honey, you don't understand. These are dangerous people. I know what people say about them, Lily interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. But what if people are wrong? What if they came here for a different reason? Her father shook his head. What other reason could there be? We've never had any contact with them. We haven't done anything to... He stopped suddenly, his eyes narrowing as he studied the warriors more carefully. Wait, that one in the front. He's older, wearing more decorations. That must be their chief. He was right. Chief Red Sky sat on a magnificent painted horse at what seemed to be the head of the formation. He was clearly in charge, and he appeared to be the one keeping the others in check. Every so often, a younger warrior would glance at him, as if asking for permission to act, and the chief would make a small gesture that meant, wait. Why would a chief come here? Lily's mother wondered aloud. For just one family? It doesn't make sense. Nothing about this makes sense, her father muttered. He wiped sweat from his forehead with his free hand, the other still clutching the rifle. I feel like we're missing something important. They were missing something important, but none of them could figure out what it was. The key to understanding this situation was locked in Lily's secret, and she was terrified to speak it aloud. What if she told them about Running Wolf and they got angry? What if they blamed her for bringing this danger to their door? What if they did something that provoked the warriors outside? So she stayed silent, wrestling with her conscience while the standoff continued. Around mid-morning, something changed. One of the younger warriors shifted on his horse, and Lily caught a glimpse of his face more clearly. Her heart skipped a beat. Even at this distance, she recognized the way he held himself, the set of his shoulders. It was Running Wolf. He'd made it home safely, and somehow, impossibly, he was here. But why? What did this mean? Running Wolf seemed to sense her watching because he turned his head slightly, scanning the house. Lily instinctively took a small step forward, and for just a second, their eyes met across the distance. She saw recognition in his face and something else. Was that a smile? It was brief, almost invisible, but it had been there. Lily's father noticed her movement. "Get back!" he commanded sharply, pulling her away from the window. "Don't let them see you clearly." "Papa, I don't think they want to hurt us," Lily said again, more urgently this time. The pieces were starting to come together in her mind, though the full picture was still unclear. "You can't know that," her father said. But there was less certainty in his voice now. The strange nature of this confrontation was wearing on him. Warriors didn't surround a house and then just sit there. They attacked or they demanded something. This patient waiting was outside his experience, and it was making him doubt everything he thought he knew. Lily's mother had moved to check their supplies, mentally calculating how long they could hold out if this became a siege. They had water from the well, but that was outside. They had maybe 3 days of food in the house. The situation was becoming clearer. They couldn't stay inside forever, but stepping outside felt like walking into a trap. "Maybe we should try to talk to them," Lily suggested. "Someone could go outside and—" "Absolutely not," both her parents said in unison. "But Papa—" "No, Lily, we stay inside until we understand what's happening. Or until they make their intentions clear." As if in response to this statement, there was movement in the circle of warriors. Chief Red Sky raised his hand, and immediately all the warriors sat up straighter, more alert. The chief said something in his language, his voice carrying clearly across the open ground, though the words meant nothing to the Whitfield family. Several warriors dismounted, but they didn't approach the house. Instead, they sat down on the ground, cross-legged, still maintaining their circle. The message was clear. They weren't leaving, but they also weren't attacking. They were settling in, prepared to wait as long as necessary. "What are they doing?" Lily's mother asked, bewildered. I think they're making camp," her father replied, equally confused. "They're planning to stay." This development changed everything. This wasn't a raid. Raids were quick, violent, over in minutes. This was something else entirely, something patient and purposeful. But what? The sun reached its peak and the day grew hot. The warriors outside showed no signs of discomfort despite sitting in the direct sunlight. Inside the house, the family was sweating, cramped and growing increasingly desperate for answers. Finally, Lily couldn't take it anymore. The guilt of her secret was crushing her, and the fear that her silence might lead to violence was too much to bear. She had to tell them. Whatever the consequences, her parents needed to know the truth. "Mama, Papa," she said, her voice shaking, "I need to tell you something. Something important." Her parents looked at her, and something in her tone made them really listen. Her father lowered the rifle slightly, giving her his full attention. "What is it, sweetheart?" her mother asked gently. Lily took a deep breath, her hands trembling. "A little over a week ago, I found someone hurt by the creek. A boy. He was caught in a trap and his leg was badly injured. I helped him. I brought him food and water and medicine and—" She trailed off, seeing the growing horror on her parents' faces. "What kind of boy?" her father asked, though from his tone he already knew the answer. "A Comanche boy," Lily whispered. "His name is Running Wolf. He was lost from his hunting party, and I couldn't just leave him there to die. I'm sorry, I know you told me to stay away from them, but he was hurt and scared and Tears were streaming down her face now. I think he's out there. I think that's why they're here. The silence that followed was deafening. Lily's parents stared at her, their minds struggling to process this information. Their little girl had been secretly caring for a Comanche warrior for over a week, right under their noses. And now his entire tribe had shown up at their door? But before either parent could respond, before they could express their shock or anger or fear, something happened outside that changed everything. Chief Red Sky stood up from where he'd been sitting on his horse. He dismounted slowly, deliberately, and began walking toward the house. He was alone, and his hands were clearly visible at his sides, carrying no weapons. Part 7. The Honor. The days following the visit from Chief Red Sky and his warriors passed in a strange blur for the Whitfield family. Everything felt different now, as if the world had shifted slightly on its axis. Lily's father moved the 3 horses into their small corral, still shaking his head in disbelief every time he looked at them. The buffalo pelts were carefully stored in the barn, worth more money than they'd see in 6 months of hard work. But the most significant change was in how Lily's parents looked at her. There was a new respect in their eyes, a recognition that their little girl had done something extraordinary. They'd always loved her, of course, but now they saw her differently, as someone capable of courage and wisdom beyond her years. Word spread quickly on the frontier. News like this couldn't be kept quiet, and within a week, neighbors from miles around were stopping by to hear the story firsthand. Most came with disbelief, some with suspicion, but all left convinced when they saw the necklace Lily wore and the gifts the Comanche had left behind. Mr. Patterson, their nearest neighbor 5 miles to the south, was one of the first to visit. He was a gruff man who'd lost his brother to a Comanche raid years before and had carried that anger with him ever since. When he first heard the story, he came to the Whitfield house ready to argue, ready to insist it was a trick or a trap. But when he saw Lily, when he heard her tell the story in her simple, honest way, something in his hardened face softened. "You're telling me," he said slowly, "that you found one of them hurt, and instead of running or telling your pa so he could finish the job, you helped him?" "Yes, sir," Lily said quietly. "He was just a boy and he was in terrible pain. I couldn't just leave him there." Mr. Patterson was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he said, "You're either the bravest child I've ever met, or the most foolish. Maybe both." He looked at Lily's father. "But I'll say this, if the chief's word is good, you folks are probably the safest settlers in Texas right now." Over the following weeks, other families came with similar reactions. The Johnsons, the McCrearys, the Hendersons, all the scattered families that made up their small frontier community. Some brought small gifts, some just wanted to see the necklace and hear the tale. Children especially were fascinated, gathering around Lily to hear about her secret friend and the mourning 40 warriors surrounded her house. But not everyone was pleased. The local militia captain, a stern man named Thornton, rode out specifically to express his concerns. "This sets a dangerous precedent," he told Lily's father on their porch one afternoon. "People might start thinking the Comanche can be trusted. They might let their guard down." Lily's father, who'd been thinking a lot about trust and fear in recent days, stood his ground. "My daughter showed mercy to a wounded boy, Captain. That act of mercy likely saved our lives. I don't see what's dangerous about that." "The dangerous part," Thornton said coldly, "is that it's not typical. You got lucky. The next family that tries to befriend one of them might not be so fortunate." "Maybe," Lily's father conceded. "But maybe if more people showed mercy instead of shooting first and asking questions later, there'd be less blood on both sides." Thornton left unsatisfied, muttering about idealism and naivety. But his words didn't change what had happened, and they didn't change the fact that Chief Red Sky's promise held true. As autumn deepened into winter, something remarkable began to happen. Other settlers in the region who had heard the story started reporting that they were being left alone by Comanche raiding parties. Groups that would have normally stolen horses or supplies seemed to pass by certain homesteads without incident. Word got around that if you knew the Whitfield family, if you were friendly with them, you were under the umbrella of Chief Red Sky's protection by association. It wasn't official, and it wasn't guaranteed, but people noticed the pattern. Lily continued to wear the necklace every day. It was heavy and sometimes uncomfortable, but she wore it with pride. Her mother had worried at first about the bear claws and bones, thinking it seemed savage, but she'd come to see it for what it really was. A symbol of honor, of bridge building, of hope that two different peoples might someday live in peace. One cold December morning, Lily was out collecting firewood when she noticed something unusual. There, carefully placed on a flat rock near the creek where she'd first found Running Wolf, was a small bundle wrapped in leather. Her heart quickened as she approached it. Inside the bundle, she found dried meat, beautifully tanned leather strips, and a small pouch of the healing herbs Running Wolf had shown her months before. There was also a drawing on a piece of bark, showing a bird in flight over mountains. It was Running Wolf's way of saying he remembered her, that he was thinking of her even though they were far apart. Lily took the gifts home with tears in her eyes. She showed her parents, and they understood what it meant. The friendship between their daughter and the young Comanche warrior was ongoing, maintained through small gestures and thoughtful gifts left in secret places. As winter settled in fully, the Whitfield family found themselves in an unusual position. They'd become something of mediators in their community. When disputes arose between settlers and the native people in the region, people would sometimes come to Lily's father for advice, knowing he had a connection that others didn't. He didn't always know what to say. He was just a farmer, not a diplomat. But he tried his best, always encouraging people to see the Comanche as individuals rather than as one faceless enemy. They're people, he'd say, just like us. They love their families, they honor their promises, and they respond to how they're treated. It was a radical idea in that time and place, but it was one born from experience. The Whitfield family had seen firsthand that understanding could replace fear, that respect could prevent violence. Christmas came and went quietly. On Christmas morning, Lily stood outside and looked toward the western horizon, wondering where Running Wolf was, if his people celebrated anything like Christmas, if he was warm and safe with his family. She touched the necklace at her throat and the wooden bird she kept in her pocket always, and she said a prayer for him. In early January, something happened that proved just how far-reaching Chief Red Sky's protection really was. A group of rough men, drifters and troublemakers came through the area looking to cause problems. They'd been harassing homesteads, stealing what they could, and generally making life difficult for honest settlers. When they approached the Whitfield property, they saw the horses, saw the obvious signs of prosperity, and decided this would be an easy target. But as they rode closer, one of them noticed something that made him pull up short. "Wait," he said to his companions, pointing at Lily, who was in the yard feeding chickens. "Look at what she's wearing." The necklace was clearly visible against her dress. Even from a distance, the bear claws and intricate beadwork were unmistakable. "That's Comanche work," another man said nervously. "And not just any Comanche work. Those are Chief's decorations." The leader of the group, a man who'd spent years on the frontier and knew the native customs better than he'd like to admit, stared at the necklace for a long moment. Then he made a decision. "We're leaving, now." But one of his men started to protest. "I said now," the leader snapped. "You don't mess with someone under Chief's protection, not unless you want 40 warriors showing up at your camp in the middle of the night. Trust me, that necklace means this family is off limits." They rode away without causing any trouble, and when Lily's father heard about it later from a neighbor who'd witnessed the encounter, he realized just how powerful Chief Red Sky's gift really was. It wasn't just a symbol. It was real protection, respected even by people who had no love for the Comanche. As winter began to thaw into early spring, Lily turned 11 years old. Her birthday was a quiet affair, just her family and a few neighbors, but it felt significant to her. A year ago, she'd been just a lonely little girl on the frontier. Now she was someone who'd made a difference, who'd built a bridge between two worlds. Her mother made her a new dress, and her father gave her a journal so she could write down her story. "Someday," he said, "people are going to want to know exactly how this happened. You should write it down in your own words, while you remember all the details." That night, by candlelight, Lily began writing. She wrote about finding Running Wolf in the trap, about the fear and the decision to help anyway. She wrote about bringing him food and water, about learning to communicate despite their different languages. She wrote about the morning 40 warriors surrounded her house and how terrified she'd been until she understood why they'd come. But most of all, she wrote about what she'd learned. That kindness was never wasted. That courage didn't always look like fighting and guns. That people were more alike than different, no matter where they came from or what language they spoke. She wrote until her hand cramped and her candle burned low. Then she put the journal carefully away, knowing she'd add to it many more times in the years to come. Spring brought new challenges and new opportunities. Lily's father, emboldened by their unique situation, decided to try something no other settler had attempted. He left a gift at the creek, a new steel knife and some tobacco, along with a note that Running Wolf could translate for his uncle. Part 8. The Legacy. 20 years passed, like water flowing through the creek where Lily had first found Running Wolf. The little girl who had shown mercy to a wounded stranger had grown into a woman of 30, married to a kind man named Thomas who'd hurt her. Story long before he'd met her and had fallen in love, with both the tale and the teller. Lily and Thomas had built their life on the same land where the remarkable events had unfolded, expanding the original Whitfield homestead into a proper ranch. Lily's parents, now elderly, lived in a smaller house on the property, spending their days watching their 3 grandchildren play in the same yard, where 40 warriors had once sat on horseback. The necklace that Chief Red Sky had given, Lily still hung in a place of honor in their home, carefully preserved behind glass. Lily no longer wore it daily as she had as a child, the years and the weight having taken their toll, but it remained the most precious thing she owned. Next to it sat the wooden bird, the compass, and her journal, now filled with decades of entries. The frontier had changed dramatically in those 2 decades. More settlers had come, towns had grown, and the conflicts between the native peoples and the newcomers had intensified. The peaceful coexistence that Lily had glimpsed in her childhood had proven impossible to maintain on a larger scale. The forces of history were too strong, the differences too great, the hunger for land too powerful. But in this one small corner of Texas, peace had held. True to his word, Chief Red Sky had kept his promise, and after his death 5 years earlier, his successor had honored it as well. The Whitfield family and their extended circle of friends and neighbors had remained untouched by the conflicts that raged elsewhere. Running Wolf, now a man of 35 and a respected leader among his people, had visited the ranch several times over the years. His English had improved greatly, and Lily had learned some Comanche. Their childhood friendship had matured into a deep mutual respect that transcended the troubles of their respective peoples. On a warm spring morning in 1887, Lily was teaching her eldest daughter, Rose, how to bake bread when a rider approached the house. It was one of their ranch hands riding hard and fast. "Mrs. Whitfield," he called out. "There's a group of Comanche approaching, maybe a dozen riders." Lily's heart didn't fill with fear as it once might have. Instead, she felt curiosity. She wiped the flour from her hands and walked out to the porch, shading her eyes against the sun. As the riders grew closer, she recognized the figure in the lead. Even after all these years, even from a distance, she knew Running Wolf's posture, the way he sat his horse. She smiled and waved, and he raised his hand in return. The group rode into the yard, and Running Wolf dismounted with the grace of a born horseman. He was no longer the injured boy she'd nursed by the creek, but a powerful warrior in the prime of his life. Yet when he smiled at her, she could still see the grateful teenager who had carved her a bird. "Lily," he said warmly, using the name he'd never stopped calling her. "It is good to see you." "And you, my old friend," she replied. "What brings you here today?" Running Wolf's expression grew more serious. "I came to tell you something important. My people are leaving these lands. The white government demands we go to the reservation in Oklahoma. We have no choice. I came to say goodbye." The words hit Lily like a physical blow. She'd known this day would come eventually, but knowing and experiencing were 2 different things. "When?" she managed to ask. "We leave in 3 days. I wanted to see you once more before we go, to thank you again as I have thanked you many times for saving my life all those years ago. Everything good that has happened to me since that day I owe to you." Lily's eyes filled with tears. "You don't owe me anything. You repaid that debt 20 times over. Your uncle's protection kept my family safe all these years. It was more than protection, Running Wolf said. You taught me something when we were young. You taught me that people can be good, even when everything tells you to be suspicious and afraid. That lesson has guided my whole life. He paused, then added, I have 3 children now. I have told them all about you, about the brave little girl who chose kindness when she could have chosen fear. They will tell their children, and their children will tell theirs. Your story will not be forgotten among my people. The other warriors who had accompanied Running Wolf dismounted and approached respectfully. Several of them were men Lily recognized from that morning long ago when they'd surrounded her house. They were older now, grayer but still strong and proud. One of them stepped forward and spoke in Comanche. Running Wolf translated, He says he was there the day we came to your home. He says he has never forgotten the sight of a child walking out alone to face a chief, with no weapon but courage. He says it changed how he sees your people. Not all of you are bad, just as not all of us are bad. He wants you to know this before we leave. Lily nodded to the warrior, too emotional to speak. Her husband Thomas came out of the house, along with their children. Rose, who was 10 years old, almost exactly the age Lily had been when she'd found Running Wolf, stared at the warriors with wide eyes. Rose, Lily said, calling her daughter forward. Come here. I want you to meet someone very important. The girl approached hesitantly and Lily placed her hand on her shoulder. This is Running Wolf. He's the friend I've told you about, the one from my stories. Rose's eyes grew even wider. The one you saved? The one from the story about the 40 warriors? Yes, Lily said, smiling through her tears. The very same. Running Wolf knelt down to Rose's level, just as Chief Red Sky had once knelt before Lily. Your mother is a great woman, he said in careful English. She has a brave heart. I hope you grow to be like her. Then Running Wolf did something that made everyone present understand the depth of his feeling. He removed something from a pouch at his waist. It was the silver compass, the one Lily had given him 20 years earlier. It was worn now, dented and scratched from decades of use, but still functional. I have carried this every day since you gave it to me, he said to Lily. It has guided me on many journeys, kept me safe, always pointed me home. Now I'm going on my final journey in these lands and I want you to have it back. Give it to your daughter. Tell her it is a reminder that kindness finds its way home, just like this compass has. Lily took the compass with shaking hands. She opened it and saw that the needle still worked perfectly, still pointing faithfully north after all these years. She closed Rose's fingers around it. Keep this safe, she told her daughter. And remember its story. Running Wolf stood and looked at Lily one last time. I wish we had more time. I wish many things had been different. But I am grateful for what we had. Our friendship proved that peace was possible, even if only in one small place. Maybe someday, Lily said, there will be peace everywhere. Maybe our grandchildren's grandchildren will live in a world where people don't have to choose between their land and their lives. Maybe, Running Wolf said, though his tone suggested he doubted it. But because of you, I have hope that it's possible. They embraced, 2 old friends saying goodbye, knowing they'd likely never see each other again. When they separated, Running Wolf mounted his horse. The other warriors did the same. Where will you go? Lily asked. After Oklahoma. Wherever my people can live in peace and dignity, Running Wolf replied. Wherever we can teach our children about their heritage, about honor and courage and kindness. Wherever we can keep our stories alive. Then you'll never truly be gone, Lily said. Stories live forever. Running Wolf smiled, that same warm smile that had comforted her when she was a frightened 10-year-old by a creek. Goodbye, Lily. Thank you for everything. May your life be long and blessed. And yours, she whispered. Safe journey, my friend. The group of warriors turned their horses and began to ride away. Lily stood with her family and watched them go, just as she'd watched Running Wolf leave all those years ago. But this time was different. This time she knew with certainty she wouldn't see him again. Rose tugged on her mother's skirt. Mama, will he be okay? Lily looked down at her daughter. This child who had her whole life ahead of her and chose hope over despair. Yes, sweetheart. He's survived this long because he's strong and smart and brave. He'll survive what comes next, too. That night, Lily sat down with her journal. Now decades old and nearly full, she wrote about Running Wolf's final visit, about the return of the compass, about the warriors who had come to say goodbye. She wrote about the ending of an era and the hope that something better might someday come. She wrote about how one simple act of kindness had rippled outward through the years, affecting not just her and Running Wolf, but their families, their communities, everyone they'd touched with their story. She wrote about the children who had been born because Running Wolf had lived, about the settlers who had survived because of Chief Red Sky's protection, about the small pocket of peace that had existed in the middle of conflict. And she wrote about the lessons she hoped her children would carry forward. That courage came in many forms. That kindness was never wasted. That seeing others as human rather than enemy was the first step toward any real peace. Years passed. Lily grew old, her hair turning silver like the compass she now kept in her eldest daughter's care. Her parents passed away peacefully,